beach house. I was wondering, have you ever wondered what creatures live in the ocean at the beach? A creature that comes to my mind is a seahorse. Do you know anything about a seahorse? Well, let's go read and find out. Okay, boys and girls, today we're going to be reading the story Mr. Seahorse, and this book is written by Eric Carle. So we're going to read this story. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and we're going to do another great craft. Okay, let's get started. Mr. and Mrs. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea. Mrs. Seahorse began to wiggle and twist this way and that. So this is Mrs. Seahorse, and that's Mr. Seahorse. And look, she's wiggling. I wonder why she's going to do that. Does anybody have any guesses? No? Okay, let's find out. It's time for me to lay my eggs, she said. Can I help? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Oh, yes, thank you, said Mrs. Seahorse, and she laid her eggs into a pouch on Mr. Seahorse's belly. I'll take good care of our eggs, said Mr. Seahorse. I promise. Okay, so Mr. Seahorse is going to be the one that is actually taking care of the eggs until they hatch, not the mommy. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a group of trumpet fish hidden in a patch of reeds. So this is the reeds. I'm going to show you what the trumpet fish look like. See them? But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Stickleback, said Mr. Seahorse. Delighted, said Mr. Stickleback. I just built a nest and right away Mrs. Stickleback laid her eggs into it. Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch. Keep up the good work, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So, boys and girls, who else is in charge of taking care of their eggs besides Mr. Stickleback? Very good, it's Mr. Seahorse. So both daddies are taking care of the eggs until they hatch. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a lionfish hidden behind a coral reef. So this is the coral reef, and we're going to see what a lionfish looks like. Ooh, look at that. He was hidden, wasn't it? It was almost like he was camouflaged. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Tilapia? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Mr. Tilapia couldn't answer. His mouth was full of eggs. I know, said Mr. Seahorse. Mrs. Tilapia laid her eggs. Now you are taking good care of them until they hatch. Mr. Tilapia nodded his head. You must be very happy, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So we've now met another creature in the sea that is a male and taking care of the eggs until they're ready to hatch. So we have Mr. Seahorse, Mr. Stickleback, and now Mr. Tilapia. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a pair of leaf fish hidden among the seaweed. So here's the seaweed, and I'm going to show you the picture now. And here they are. So this is leaf fish. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Curtis? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Perfectly fine, replied Mr. Curtis. Mrs. Curtis laid her eggs, and I have stuck them on my head. Now I'm taking good care of them until they hatch. You are doing a good job, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So, boys and girls, who else is now taking care of the eggs until they are ready to hatch? Very good, it's Mr. Curtis. As Mr. Seahorse drifted gently through the sea, he passed right by a stonefish hidden behind a rock. So here's the rock, and I'm going to show you what it looks like now. You see it? It's almost like camouflage again. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. How are you, Mr. Pipe? Asked Mr. Seahorse. Couldn't be better, replied Mr. Pipe. Mrs. Pipe laid her eggs along my belly. Now I am taking good care of them until they hatch. You should feel proud of yourself, said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. Now, which other creature has the eggs on their belly? Very good, it's Mr. Seahorse. Let's see what happens next. But before long, Mr. Seahorse met another fish. "How are you, Mr. Bullhead?" asked Mr. Seahorse. "Tip-top," replied Mr. Bullhead. "Mrs. Bullhead laid her eggs, and the eggs hatched. Now I'm babysitting." "You are doing a fine job," said Mr. Seahorse, and swam on his way. So his babies are actually born. They've hatched, and they're just running around, and he is trying to babysit them. Make sure they don't get into any trouble. The time had come for the seahorse babies to be born. Mr. Seahorse wiggled and twisted this way and that. At last, the babies tumbled from Mr. Seahorse's pouch and swam away. One baby turned around and tried to come back into the pouch. "Oh, no," said Mr. Seahorse. "I do love you, but now you are ready to be on your own." So, in this picture, Mr. Seahorse finally had, the babies were finally born, right? And that's the end of this book. Now, I love Eric Carle. He's one of my favorite authors because of the pictures that are in his books. They are just always so pretty. Now that we have read the story, we're going to do a fun activity that involves a seahorse. Let's get started. Okay, boys and girls, like I promised, we're going to do a really fun activity that involves a seahorse. When we read the story, Mr. Seahorse, I learned so much information about Mr. Seahorse. I did not know that male seahorses took care of the eggs until they were ready to hatch. I had no idea that they had a pouch in their belly. I thought that was really interesting to learn. Now, our activity that we're going to be doing is we are going to be painting a seahorse. So, in just a second, we're going to paint this seahorse to look like Mr. Seahorse. Of course, we can make it our own, but we're going to use some of the same colors that Mr. Seahorse is. Okay, so here is what we need to do before we can paint our seahorse. First of all, we have to have all of our materials. So for this craft, you're going to need yellow paint, orange paint, purple paint, green paint, blue, purpley, pinkish, and red. Okay, so I'm going to take this seahorse, this cardstock seahorse, everybody has one of these, and I'm going to layer the paint to make it look like Mr. Seahorse. So let me show you a picture. Okay, so I'm going to try to make my seahorse look like Mr. Seahorse. Of course, it won't look exactly alike because I don't have the exact colors, but we're going to make it our own anyway. So it'll turn out just as great. Okay, so not only do we need our cardstock seahorse, we also need a piece of paper. So we're going to paint our seahorse onto this piece of paper. We're actually going to also glue the seahorse. We're going to glue the seahorse on this piece of paper, and then we're going to paint a little design in the back to make it look like he is in the sea. So we need a glue stick as well. And then the last thing that we need for Mr. Seahorse is a googly eye, and we are going to glue that onto our seahorse. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and paint my seahorse, and you can go ahead and paint your seahorse, and we will be back in just a little bit. Let's get started. Okay, boys and girls, my seahorse is finally dry. I want you to look at him. I think he looks awesome, and I know that everybody else's looks different too, and that's okay. I tried to make mine as similar as I could to the Mr. Seahorse. I wasn't able to get it exactly right, but I'm still really happy with my painting. I'm only missing one thing now. And what is that? You're right, he doesn't have an eyeball. So we're now going to glue his googly eye on so he will be complete. So I'm going to take my glue gun, not my glue gun, I'm going to take my glue stick, and I'm going to glue his eye on there. And now I think he looks complete. So I'm going to put my lid back on. And I want you to look. He looks awesome. So we finished our craft, but now we're going to do something else. We are now going to do a little writing activity. Okay, boys and girls, like I said, you're going to be doing a writing activity. Now, we just read about a seahorse, and we learned some facts about a seahorse, and it is just one creature in the ocean. Okay, boys and girls, the ocean has so many creatures. Okay, so here is what you're going to do for this writing activity. You're going to pretend that you're a scientist, okay? And you have discovered a brand new creature, okay? So nobody has seen this creature before. It's never been discovered. You are the person that is discovering it, okay? You're going to write a good short paragraph about this creature. So I want you to describe what it looks like, what the name of your creature is, and what it eats, okay? So you can't just use any creature. You can't say, I discovered a seahorse, because we already know there's a seahorse in the sea. This has to be something that nobody has ever come up with. It can have a crazy name. It can have crazy eyes. It can have all of those things because it is the creature you are discovering. Okay, so like I said, you're going to write a good short paragraph. When I say this, I want 5 to 7 really good sentences. Now remember, when we are writing a sentence, we need to have a what at the beginning of it. Someone tell me. Very good. We have to have a capital letter. Every sentence that you write for me, it has to have a capital letter. Okay, what does it have to have at the end? What's that called? Very good. It's a punctuation mark, right? So it can be a period or an exclamation mark, because in this case, we're not going to be asking any questions, so we don't need a question mark. So it can have a period or an exclamation mark. Very good. Also, when you are writing your good paragraph, I don't want all your words on top of each other. Make sure they're spaced out and they look really good so I can read it. Okay? So that's what you need to do for your paragraph. But I don't want you to write just simple sentences. I want you to write sentences that describe your creature. So you're going to use adjectives in your sentences. And remember, we had a lesson on adjectives a couple of weeks ago. So an adjective is a describing word. It describes your creature. So that's what you're going to do. Okay, when I say describe your creature, I mean you're going to describe the color. You're going to describe how many eyes it has. You're going to describe if it's really big or if it's teeny tiny. You're going to describe what it eats. Is it yummy food that we would eat, or is it disgusting and yucky? Come up with words like that when you are writing your story. Now, while you are writing your story, I'm going to write my story as well. So I'm going to come up with my own creature as well. So let's all get started on this, and we'll come back together in just a minute. Remember, 5 to 7 sentences that use adjectives. Remember, adjectives are describing words. That helps make our sentences a lot better. It just makes them sound stronger because we want strong sentences, not wimpy sentences. Okay, let's get started now. Okay, boys and girls, I have finished writing my paragraph about the creature that I discovered in the sea. So, the creature that I discovered is called a monkeyfish. And I'm gonna show you. I wrote 7 really good sentences, and I'm going to read them to you now. I found a new creature in the sea. This creature is called a monkeyfish. This fish is brown and has furry scales. This monkeyfish is very small and has 3 giant eyes. The monkeyfish will spit on other small fish. The monkeyfish only eats small blue fish. The monkeyfish lives in a small, dark cave in the sea. Okay? And then I tried to draw a picture of him. Okay? So, that is what my paragraph was about. It was about a monkeyfish.
I described to you what the name was, how many eyes it had. I described if it was big or small. I described what the monkeyfish will do to other fish. I described what the monkeyfish will eat and where the monkeyfish lives. Now, I'm sure that everybody came up with great paragraphs, and I know I'm going to enjoy reading them. Okay, guys, so to wrap up this writing activity, remember we reviewed what you have to do at the very beginning of a sentence, which is a capital letter. And you also have to include punctuation marks, whether it be a period, an exclamation mark, or a question mark if you're going to ask a question when you are writing. Okay? Another thing was making sure that your words were spaced out and on top of each other so people can read what you are writing. And the last thing that we talked about was adjectives. Remember, when we are writing, we want to include adjectives, which are describing words. Because if somebody is reading your paper, they're going to want to be able to close their eyes and picture exactly what you're writing about, okay? So if you don't use adjectives, people are not going to be able to envision what you're trying to say. And when you're writing something, you want your audience or the person that's reading your paper or story, you want them to be able to know exactly what you are talking about. So that's why it's so important to use adjectives in your writing. Now, I hope you enjoyed learning about the seahorse and making the seahorse craft, and I really hope you enjoyed being able to write about a creature in the sea that nobody has ever discovered. Guys, I hope you had a great time here at the beach this week. I hope you've learned so much information, and I hope you will continue to want to learn to read and to love reading. It was so great hanging out with you all. I'll see you next time. Bye.